Prepare yourself for invasion. This is Indie Invasion.
June 2nd, 1691. We are not alone. My original belief that the bottom of the sea was an empty graveyard of sunken corpses and skeletal wrecks of sea vessels has been shattered during a recent exploration of a wreck at 100 fathoms. Our team of fortune hunters discovered schools of predatory fish and masses of arthropods, some equipped with vicious jaws that can penetrate even our steel armor. The wildlife was of less concern, though, than the appearance of old enemies from the Underlands. Our force has had pitched battles with the foul Dark Mariners, being named for their terrifying vessels, amalgams of living flesh, metal, and crystal. They are completely at home underwater, and their warriors and sorcerers appear to be even more effective when fighting at the bottom of the sea. Here they utilize an unknown type of vibrational weaponry that has caused such horrific deaths to our men, liquefying their flesh and bone within their suits. Many quake now at the sight of the enemy. Our heavy steel armor seems to afford little protection against these weapons, but we are fortunate that they are only effective at close range, so that we can engage them at a longer range with our spear guns and explosive torpedoes, which thankfully still devastate their light carapace armor. It has been difficult to continue on dives when confronted by these beings, as many of the soldiers claim to see visions and hear voices commanding them to do horrible things to their brothers in arms. In 2 instances, divers turned on the team, killing many but recalling nothing later after being dragged back to the surface. Just last week, 3 divers suddenly released their ballast, dropping down into the inky darkness below as if called by some siren of the deep. I now suspect that there is some tentacled demon below that has the capacity to enslave the minds of our men, even more so than the cephalids we encountered in the Underlands. Our only defense will be to steal our minds, girding against the siren's call, as it were. Thankfully, we still have a few of the Templar Order of Shadow Slayers among the expedition, many of which have battled against the Dark Mariners in the Underlands, their iron wills unbroken by this vile enemy. Toughened troops will be valuable, as Wormwood has been continually devising new techniques to combat the apparent overwhelming strength of the tentacled horrors. One of his new ideas is pure madness. He plans to have a team of divers breach the hull of the living vessels of the Dark Mariners, which he believes to be completely filled with water, and then scuttle the ship or capture the commander. A week ago, we were confronted with a new enemy in the deep, a cadre of reptilian beings cruising through the ruins on a shallow shelf, their powerful tails propelling them through the water the same way as the ocean crocodiles of Terra Australis. We had a brief skirmish with this scaly horde, but needed to retreat after the battle was joined by an enormous sea dragon, apparently controlled by a draconid beastmaster swimming nearby. These variants of the cold-blooded monsters we had fought on land were equipped with webbed hand and feet and could dive down great distances with little effort. Named sea demons by our men, these beasts also seemed to be able to travel out of water as well, as we discovered during one of their raids upon our encampment. We are discovering new dangers from this force with each passing day now, including a sighting of powerful humanoid beasts, nauseatingly man-like, with an appearance that hinted of the savage Garks of the Sunless Kingdom. They seemed completely adapted to the deep and were unaffected by the frigid water or the scalding jets from undersea thermal vents. Their barbed spears and tridents were charged with crackling energy and caused heavy casualties to our team, and we were unable to keep them from stealing a great deal of gold and crystals from the wreck we had rightly claimed. Back on shore, Ensign McCardle declared that he had seen one of these things skulking about the caverns at the harbor, near a group of troglodytes that, upon interrogation, claimed to have no knowledge of such a creature. A dubious claim, knowing their scheming nature. We have continued to encounter more of these vile things, accompanied by blasphemous fishmen referred to as Dagathonans by our troglodyte guide, and enormous fish with jaws that crushed our suits as a parrot cracks a nutshell. Just the previous week, we encountered an insectoid monstrosity carrying a curious breathing apparatus and displaying skill at handling the technology of the deep wrecks. I now believe that they are all part of coordinated efforts to salvage treasures of the deep. Wormwood's plan for the submarine assault is progressing slowly, and I fear for the future of the expedition. There is cause to believe that the dives themselves may be causing instability in some of the men, beyond the battles with nightmares of the deep. After an expedition not 2 nights past, one of our divers claimed to have seen a pair of female divers, clad in glittering golden harness but without breathing gear of any type, or protection from the deathly cold of the deep. These mermaids, as he called them, were freely swimming through a wreck, accompanied by slender men in golden armor, wielding some sort of projectile weapons. I sent the man back to the brig for his own protection, but only a day later did we meet with the force we now know as the Ancients of Adelon. Their ability to harness the energy of the ethers astonishes even Wormwood, who still steadfastly claims that he can replicate their technology with time and resources. From what we've gathered from salvaged engravings and from a captured Axabalan Amazon, these new enemies are actually descendants of the last true elder race of the Underlands, whose ruined civilization we scour for bits of gold and trinkets. The beings had migrated from their monolithic temples on land to elegant towers of crystal and metal on the bottom of the sea, becoming further twisted by their experiments with the ethers and the unholy creatures that reside beyond the windows of our vision. They left behind a few sorceresses to act as keepers of the Underlands, controlling the savages that had only just migrated to the underground realm. No trace of the elder beings remains, though, save their artifacts and structures, and the Amazons provide no more information on the subject. From what we could gather, the sect of Adelon was a small group that rebelled against the decadence of their leaders and traveled out into the open seas of the surface world to create their own kingdom. The she-devil spoke of these beings with reverence, claiming that the gods had finally returned from their exile to reclaim what was taken from them by their elders, and that they will rebuild their fractured empire of land and sea forces into a new power. The connection to the female divers was all too clear now, and we feared that this new enemy would be as dangerous as the Axabalan sorceresses had been on land, or more so if they were able to consolidate their forces. Our fears were justified. Only yesterday our troops were assaulted by these mysterious enemies, the only survivor describing terrifying vortices being created by the female sorceresses, and the sight of his unit being decimated by piercing beams of light from the male soldiers that cut through their armored suits. The last of the team was slaughtered by soulless automatons in the shape of massive sea creatures, cruising through the waters and finishing off the wounded with glowing blades and metal claws. The shaken survivor did state, though, that their armor was susceptible to damage from our crude steel spears and torpedoes, so all hope may not be lost.
Thanks, guys, for listening to today's tales. You can find our Indie Invasion podcast on all podcast platforms, including Podbean, Google, and iTunes. And please visit us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and if you can, support us on Patreon/Indie Invasion. And feel free to email us with any questions or comments at indieinvasion@gmail.com. And remember, guys, don't forget to prepare yourself for the invasion.